Problem 5-27. Write the inverse equation for each of the following equations. Letter A. We have y is equal to 3x minus 8. I'm going to go ahead and show a couple different methods for coming up with the inverse equation here. The first one is, remember, we look at x, and let's pretend that we knew what x was. And if we knew what x was and we were just simplifying this side here, we would follow the order of operations. So the first thing we would do here is we would multiply by 3. And then we would subtract 8. And that would be all we needed to do. That would give us our output. So in going backwards, we want to think about, well, the last thing we would have done there was subtract 8. So the first thing we would do would be to add 8. So we start at the end and we work our way back to the beginning. Just like you're solving the equation, you'd add 8 to each side there. Then the inverse operation for multiplying by 3 would be dividing by 3. Now we can take this information and create an inverse equation. So we know then that y is going to equal, first thing we're going to do to our x is we're going to add 8 to it. So I'm going to say x plus 8. That would give us a new number, and we'd have to take that value or that number and divide it by 3. So we're going to say x plus 8 over 3. So y equals a quantity of x plus 8 over 3 is going to be our inverse to our original equation in A. Letter B, we end up starting with y equals 1/2 x plus 6. So using the same method here, I'm going to go ahead and list out what I would do if I was simplifying. Well, 1/2 times x here would give us a value, and then we would add 6 to it. So if we just list out our steps, we're going to multiply by 1/2. Now, this is the same thing here. Multiplying by 1/2 is the same thing as what? We're going to say that's the same as dividing by 2, isn't it? Multiplying by 1/2 and dividing by 2 are the same thing. So you could actually use either one of these as your first step there. I could say, oh, I'm dividing x by 2 because it's the same as multiplying by 1/2. And then we're adding 6 in our second step. So if we look to undo these and go backwards here, the first thing we would do is we would subtract our 6. And then we get up here, you could either say you're doing the opposite of dividing by 2, or say you're going to do the opposite of multiplying by 1/2, which would be dividing by 1/2. Well, dividing by half is the same thing as multiplying by 2. I'm going to go ahead and just write the multiplying by 2 there. So our inverse ends up being, well, take our x, and we're going to subtract 6 from it first. And then we're going to multiply that by 2. Now some of you may have done the multiplying by 1/2 and then said that you were going to divide by 1/2, which would also work. you could end up with this here. You could have said y equals x minus 6 divided by 1/2. We try not to leave fractions and fractions like that, but that would also be correct there. This is the same answer as this. So just want to make sure if you ended up with this, this means the same as what I have right here. All right, let's do the last one here. Let's do C, and then I'll show you a different way to approach these. We have y equals the quantity of x plus 6 over 2. So as we try to list out our steps, if we were looking at order of operations, we have our x, and we would add 6. Then we would divide by 2. To do the inverse, or to undo everything here and go backwards, instead of dividing by 2, we would have to multiply by 2. After we've multiplied by 2, then we would have to undo the adding 6. We'd have to subtract 6. So we'd have y is equal to, let's take our x, let's multiply it by 2. So we have 2x. And then we're going to subtract our 6 there. So for each of these here, there are our answers. Remember, this is the same thing there. Now, is there another way to do this? Yes, there is. I know that some of us do a great job with finding these, but some of us get a little confused when we're writing out all our steps there. Some of us are just lazy and don't want to do all that. But as long as you're understanding it there is another approach you can take. So let's go ahead here and let's look at our A here. We had our y equals 3x minus 8. And for our functions, we were doing our inverse functions. We were taking our outputs and making them the inputs, and vice versa. So our x's and y's ended up switching places. So let's see what happens here if we take our x and our y and we flip-flop them in our actual equation. If I took this and I made this into x equals 3y minus 8, I just took it and I flip-flopped these two. And let's try to put it back into the form where y is by itself. Well, if I want to solve this for y, I'm going to have to add 8 to each side. I now have x plus 8 is equal to 3 times y. And if I want to undo that, I would divide this side by 3, and I would have to divide this side by 3. And you'll see here what we end up with is y equals x plus 8 over 3. So this is just a second approach for getting the inverse equation by swapping out our x's and y's and then solving it for y. Let's look and see if it holds true for all of them. Let's try B here. Letter B, we start with y equals 1/2 x plus 6. So the first thing we need to do is we need to rewrite it. And we're going to rewrite it now with our x and y's swapped out. So we have x equals 1/2 y plus 6. Let's get y by itself now, so we subtract 6 from each side. We have x minus 6 is equal to half a y. Well, to make this a whole y, we're going to have to multiply each side times 2. So if we multiply this side times 2, and we multiply this side times 2, we should end up with 2 times the quantity of x minus 6 is equal to y. And is that the same thing here? Yes, it is. Let's go ahead here and let's just do that last one. So letter C. We had y was equal to x plus 6 over 2. Rewrite it here with our x's and y's switched, so replacing our inputs with our outputs. So x equals y plus 6 divided by 2. To undo this, we're going to have to multiply by 2. Notice here, multiply by 2 on both sides. So as we do that, we're going to end up with 2x equals y plus 6. Subtract our 6 from each side, and we get 2x minus 6 equals y. So one more time, we end up with the exact same answer. Now you want to make sure you check with your teacher about which way they prefer that you do it there. As long as you're understanding it and you're doing it correctly, it's not going to be a big deal, but as you're learning it here, you need to make sure you understand what's going on first. Last little bit to this here, make sure you are checking your answers. There are a couple ways you can check them. Remember, plug in a point into any of your functions there. So plug in an input to get an output, and then plug in whatever that output was into your other function or your inverse to make sure that you get your input again. You could also graph them both and see if they are a reflection over the line y equals x. This is problem 5-27. This is 2 different methods for doing the same thing. Hopefully you understand at least one of them there. If you have questions, make sure you ask your teacher. All right, this is Mr. Boyd.